I have sent to the Congress today a series of proposals to help fight mental illness and mental retardation. These two afflictions have been long neglected. They occur more frequently, affect more people, require more prolonged treatment, cause more individual and family suffering than any other condition in American life. It has been tolerated too long. It has troubled our national conscience, but only as a problem unpleasant to mention, easy to postpone, and despairing of solution. The time has come for a great national effort. New medical, scientific, and social tools and insights are now available.
The pain that he was referring to in this talk, the unpleasantness, the unmentionable condition that we are all gathered together to talk about today and that we've been gathered together to work on for all these years, he's referring to the history of intellectual disability and the way that we were caring for or not caring for people with intellectual disability at the time that he gave this talk. In 1963, most people with significant intellectual disability and most children with ASD were living in places like this. This is a very large institution in New York, which at the time held 6,000 people, warehoused 6,000 people with intellectual disability from birth to death. We had an institution like this on the west side of town, and one of my first jobs here was to carry out assessments for all the children who were under 21. It was one of the contracts that we had. The Willowbrook life was the life that people with intellectual disability lived all over this country, and it was the place where people like me got our first experiences in this work. This is where you worked if you wanted to do this kind of work. So infants came in from the nursery, from delivery for many children, and lived in wards like this until they could walk. Or they left the infant wards and moved into wards like this. This is the kind of ward I was working on when I was in JFK doing assessments with our teams. And people spent their lives in situations like this. This is what it was like. I worked in 3 of these by the time I was 24 years old. This is what I saw every day of my life. And a great heroic act that Geraldo Rivera did, I don't ever make fun of him. In 1972, as a young man, he took an undercover camera group into Willowbrook. He just walked in, he filmed every day, and he was on national news every night, showing the videos and the pictures I'm showing you. And it was a point at which we could not turn back from this. Now it was in the public eye, what we were doing and not doing for people with intellectual disability. And things had to change. And the time was ripe for things to change. The research that Kennedy was talking about, the new promises were coming up in the biological sciences and in the developmental sciences. A very critical book, Intelligence and Experience, was published in 1962 by J. McVicker Hunt. And in this book, he took on the eugenics movement, which was the source of institutional life and the eventual separation of people with intellectual disability from community and from family. And he took on the entire argument, demonstrating with lovely science in situation after situation in which various environmental experiences drastically altered the outcomes of children's developmental courses. That science and the developmental science that was going on at the time, looking at early cognitive development, early language development, we're starting to understand how children grew, and we were starting to see that children with intellectual disabilities were following very similar trajectories. So the developmental science was beginning to give us the information that we needed to do the kind of work we would do in JFK. At the same time, the science of learning, the work from Skinner's lab, was being moved into the treatment of people with very severe disability, both intellectual disability and severe psychiatric disorder. And this is Mark Gold in a video that people of my era probably remember. The video is called Try Another Way. It's on YouTube. I urge you to go look at this. This work was in the 1960s. He's a special educator, and he developed a task, the bicycle brake assembly task, in which he taught. It's about a 70-step assembly task that he used to teach people with severe and profound intellectual disability in the institutions to carry out. He taught them to do the task, and he demonstrated that when they learned the task, they were performing at roughly the same level as any paid worker to carry these tasks out. And he did this using the technology of applied behavior analysis, processes of reinforcement, shaping, chaining, and fading that have become an absolute necessity in the work that we all do with young children with disabilities. This was the other piece of science that opened up the promise of behavioral interventions for people with intellectual disabilities. But it was a Life magazine article published on May 7th, 1965, called Screams, Slaps, and Love, that really brought autism treatment and applied behavior analysis to the public front. This is Lovaas, and I read this article when I was a teenager. This is what got me into autism, and as I travel around talking to other autism people of my generation, many of us were drawn in by this article. It had dramatic pictures. You can find this online. It's an incredible article talking about life at home for children with autism who've never been treated, what goes on, and what we can do with very careful learning techniques applied at a frequent enough intensity that children can take advantage of them. He used electric grids in the floors to provide mild electric shocks to stop severely unwanted behavior. And the Life magazine article really played up the amount of punishment that was being used. At the time, this was how these interventions were carried out. And while at this point in our lives we can't imagine doing these things, at that point in time it was part of the science and it was going on everywhere. But Lovaas's work brought autism and the interest in autism to the lay public for the first time. From that point on, a series of legislative acts took place. The Civil Rights Act, I think, really set the groundwork for everything that's happened since then. Project Head Start began the science and the practice of early intervention 1965 as part of Johnson's War on Poverty. 1975 was when he passed the first law that said children with intellectual disability had the right to a public education. That wasn't so long ago. That's within the lifetimes of most of the young people who are working in this field now. And it wasn't until 1980 that the court said that people who lived in institutions had basic human rights, that it was illegal to treat them as slaves, that it was illegal to keep them for life in an institution, which was done for the higher functioning people there because they worked the institutions. They cared for the clients. They ran the plumbing and the groundskeeping and all of the work. And that was slavery. And it was in 1980 that was declared illegal. And that was the major point at which institutions started to close. Willowbrook didn't close until 1985. That's 20 years after the expose. But it was this act that finally made the financial picture of institutions impossible and had a tremendous influence on moving people with institutions into community life. 1986 provided public education for infants and toddlers with developmental risk. And in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act provided many more rights for older people with milder impairments as well, people who needed supports in everyday situations like college and work. So this is a recent history. I've worked throughout almost all this history. And so this is recent for us. And for those of you who were born and moved into the field after this, know that this is very close. And it's a big part of the emotionality that we all experience in the work because we lived before this and we're so clear about what we can never go back to. So what did we know about autism at that point in time? One of the things we thought we knew was that the intellectual abilities of children with autism and children with intellectual disorder were pretty stable across the lifespan. Here are two large longitudinal studies based on a large group of young children with autism and a young group of children with developmental disorders, first seen at age 2 and followed to late childhood, 9, 10, 11, 12. These are all children born after the Public Law Act, so these are all children getting community education. And what you see here is that the mean IQ in both of these samples, there are about 200 children in these samples of autism, which is in blue. The mean IQ of these groups is in the mid-40s and stays in that 40 to 5 range, 50, 40s, 50s, throughout childhood. The children who were in these samples with developmental disabilities, not autism, show somewhat higher scores in the 60s in both samples, but again, very stable pictures. And this is very much what we thought about the kind of learning rates of people who had slower learning rates, that this was a fairly stable situation based on the biology of the way that their brains took in information. The Game Changer was published in 1987 when Ivar Lovaas's first paper described the IQ changes and the incredible gains made by a group of children that he treated with intensive 40-hour-a-week applied behavior analysis over many years of time, starting at age 2 to 3 and continuing through the early childhood years. In this graph, we see a group of children who received low-intensity treatment during that period of time, whose IQs raised about 10 points from the mid-40s to the mid-50s by the time they were 13. This is the group of children he treated with IQs in around 50, raised to about 83 by the time they were 7 or 8. At this point, the majority of children were in public schools. Half of these children were functioning without any disability, functioning well in all domains of life, and continued to function in that way until age 13. He used the word recovery. We had very strong reactions to that. Not only did IQs change, but language abilities were found to be very strong in this group of children, and adaptive behavior at age 8 was dramatically improved in the children who'd received the intensive treatment in the normal range. The papers that followed this publication in the journal, the discussion papers, were unanimous in questioning the science, questioning the outcomes, questioning the interpretation, questioning the measurement. For me, as a young person doing autism intervention at this point, it was like a lightning bolt. It was like, really? This could happen? We could be doing this? It's like, all right, then we have to figure out how. And the work that he's done has been well replicated now. I think there is no question that autism intervention, when delivered with many, many learning opportunities in that very critical period of language learning in early childhood, has tremendous effects in changing the course. Autism treatment has tremendous effects at any time in anybody's life because we are all learners. Humans learn forever. But because language is so affected, that language learning period is a particularly important time for this kind of intervention. And so there's the first 20 years of JFK Partners' life, beginning with Kennedy's speech and the institutionalization era, and moving into the promise of early intervention and the power of early intervention, both from the work stimulated by Head Start and the passage of the public law that supported early intervention, and also by Lovaas's work. So where did things go in the next 20 years, which I'll basically call the present, the beginning part of this 20-year decade? Well, one of the principles that was going on at JFK Partners was a very strong focus on early intervention. There was a preschool there. Marge Greenberg ran that preschool. For many years, it was a fine, developmentally oriented center for children with risk of various kinds. And so I was there, and we managed to get a grant from OSERS to create a demonstration project using a developmental approach to early autism. And at the time, there were no other developmental approaches published or being talked about. We were the only one that was funded, as far as I know as well. And so we followed the JFK tradition of focus on early detection, early intervention, early treatment, and strong developmental science by developing the Denver model, our play school, the beginning of the work here in autism treatment. And my colleagues Hal Lewis and Judy Reven, Terry Hall and Terry Katz, Diane Osaki, we teamed up together, pooling everything that we knew and could learn from the science that was going on all around us to try to really change the course of young children's lives. We worked closely with families. We worked in a precise manner in terms of setting careful objectives. And the attention started to come for this model. And there were several features about it that I think led to the power that the model that we developed had. First of all, it was ASD specific. It was built on the phenotype of autism, the behavioral phenotype that had been described by the developmental science. So we weren't just tackling deficits that children had. We were really focusing on joint attention, imitation, the development of communication, and play as the social learning tools that all young children need, and that young children with autism were particularly separated from by the nature of autism and their diminished interest in watching other people and in initiating social interactions and keeping them going. We focused on all areas of development. We targeted every area of development, and we had specialists, an interdisciplinary model, helping us understand how development comes about in typically developing children during the early childhood period. And we built that into learning opportunities across every day of these children's lives, 4 hours a day, 12 months a year for 2 or 3 years. We integrated developmental and behavioral or learning science, and that was a long process that went on through the entire period we were here. First getting the developmental parts of it down, and then as the publications of Lovaas were coming out, moving into learning about the tools of applied behavior analysis. I visited Lovaas's lab. I was with Laura Schreibman in PRT. We were going out, and Diane was making visits in every conference she could get. We were bringing in the science that we could bring in as fast as we could, working with colleagues from Kansas, and trying to figure out how to integrate applied behavior analysis principles into a developmental curriculum. And when I say developmental, I'm including relationship, the importance of relationships for learning, and the developmental approach to communication science, not the learning approach, which is a big mistake that too many behavior analysts are still making. The science of communication is not operant learning. So we're bringing these together and trying to bring a whole out of it. We were committed to evidence-based practices, both in developmental and in learning science, and we were committed to a data-based approach. We took data, we wrote objectives, and we took data every day, even in the early 80s. Jean Herbison could hang me sometimes about wanting to see the charts on the wall, but we took data and we used the data, and over years learned how to be more and more data-based in our problem solving. I want to give you just a little picture of what the treatment looks like in its current form. So as I moved from Denver to California, I had the opportunity to join up with Jerry Dawson at the University of Washington, and she had gotten a large grant from NIH to develop an intervention project, treatment science project, starting with very young children, starting with 2-year-olds or younger, and carrying out the interventions at home, which is where 2-year-olds are. And so she and I teamed up she wanted to bring the Denver model concepts into this intervention. But she also had behavior analysts there who'd been trained by Laura Schreibman in the PRT tradition. And so I had the opportunity to team up with Jamie Winter to bring Denver model into a PRT mindset. And it was a fantastic experience because working together with those behavior analysts, we really got the measurement down, and I feel like we really got the integration of developmental and behavioral pieces into it. Diane had figured it out first here, but I needed to learn it. It took me a longer time. I was a slower learner than Diane about how to completely integrate precise teaching inside naturalistic interactions and play-based relationship warm routines. So here's an example of what ESDM looks like, the Early Start Denver model. This is a 22-month-old. She's in her second hour of treatment right now. She's a very passive little girl with autism. Her parents said she didn't speak. She's low tone, lays on the floor, initiates almost nothing, is not very interested in objects or people. So this is a starting state, and this is Jamie Winter working with her. She'll cover about 14 objectives in the 8 minutes of this play, and she averages a learning opportunity every 10 seconds. She followed her lead into the blocks. The child showed interest in that, and that's why she picked it. But she didn't sustain her attention through it. And following children's leads is a very important skill and technique. Easy to watch this for a long time. I want to point out some of the objectives you might not have noticed. The reinforcer is the adult banging the drum. That is what this child is working for. It's not her banging the drum, you see it later. But so there are very careful ABCs to this. One of her objectives is initiating interactions with gaze, with voice, or with gesture. So you see a very nice time there where Amy just waits. And the child looks up and she immediately moves into action with the drum. There's the reinforcer for initiating with gaze. It happens with all the initiations with speech. It happens with all the gestures towards the adult. You see the work on imitation, imitation with actions, imitation with gestures, imitation with words. You certainly see the reinforcement every time the child speaks. You see the joint attention structure, which is a technique which is the basic framework for ESDM, setting up an activity with the child, developing theme with the child, and then running after variation, after variation, after variation to address objective after objective after objective. So you see the very strong emphasis here on social learning and the child being an equal partner with the adult. It's a very balanced interaction. The child is a leader as much as a follower. The adult is a follower as much as a leader. It's a dyadic interaction that's very well balanced. It's warm, it's fun and pleasant. What other things do I want to point out to you? I think those are some of the crucial things to look at. But as I said, the number of objectives that are being able to be woven into this, it's probably at least as many learning opportunities as you could get into a discrete trial teaching. But there are no breaks needed because it follows the natural flow of children. So it's very easy to do an hour of this kind of intervention or 2 hours of this intervention with no downtime, just transitions from activity to activity to activity. And so there's a very highly structured treatment plan that the therapist is delivering with a data sheet that is being filled out every 15 minutes in therapy. But there are also a set of very specific therapy skills that the adults are scored on, that we can objectively measure and have very high inter-rater reliability on, very consistent, that we can train people to, parents and professionals. And some of those main characteristics, you've just seen them, are first of all, adults and children building activities together. It's a partnership, a co-construction of routines, both play routines and themes from life. The adults learn to capture children's attention and hold it. Look at the attentional control Jamie has in that video. She never loses that child's attention, and she's doing a number of things to hang on to it. This idea of the four-step joint activity, that is the primary teaching tool inside ESDM. And it's a magnificent way of getting lots of learning opportunities in, covering many different objectives within a single play activity, which keeps it from getting boring and helps children build out an elaborated set of play and language activities. We focus and score on the balance of the interactions, the focus on joint attention, gaze shifts from objects to people back and forth, and the positive quality, the affective quality that the adult brings to this. Very frequent, very clear ABC teaching sequences are embedded throughout all of the work that we do, but it looks effortless, doesn't it? It looks completely natural. It doesn't look intense, it doesn't look artificial, and it doesn't look like kids are working hard. And yet, this is a very intense intervention with a very, very high frequency of learning opportunities. And the focus on being responsive and sensitive to children's communications, a vital part of helping young children learn to speak, particularly children who are having difficulty with that. And I did mention speech. I'm very, very committed to helping young children with autism learn to talk. And one of the things we learned here in Denver was that when we started the preschool, 50% of children with autism were expected to be nonverbal forever. But as we applied developmental science principles to the development of communication, we learned that was unnecessary. While we were here, 75% of our children learned to speak in the first year in our preschool. When I got the first project funded in California to look at intensive intervention, I wanted to see 90% of children verbal within 2 years. We've been at 90% verbal within 2 years in 3 separate studies with over almost 200 children participating. We should expect that young children with autism will speak. It is a rare child who can't, but you may have to stand on your head. You have to pull every piece of science you can for some children. For some children, it's effortless. This little girl was having her first words in this hour, in her second hour of treatment. Some children it comes easily, some children it comes with difficulty, but speech, any kind of communication is critical, but speech is far more possible than we thought, and it's a lesson I want you to take home if you didn't know that before. The outcomes from our first randomized controlled trial of Early Start Denver model created quite a stir in the autism community because this was the first intensive developmental model that had been tested in an RCT, number one, because we were delivering 15 hours a week in children's homes, not 30 to 40, number two, and because the intervention lasted only 2 years. However, the results from our first study are quite parallel to the results that Lovas published in the original papers that he did. We found a 20-point increase in children who received Early Start Denver model for 2 years compared to a 6-point IQ increase in the children who were receiving community treatments. And this is in the years 2000, so these are children who are getting early intervention through the public system in Seattle, with a largely middle-class group of children participating. We had similar effects in developmental quotients, overall in receptive language, in expressive language, and in adaptive behavior. We were affecting all aspects of children's lives, at home, in testing situations, and in daily conversation. I want to show you what that kind of change looks like, very briefly. Here's the first child that we enrolled in our site when we did the first replication study. This little boy is also 22 months. He doesn't speak, he doesn't play. He's the third child in his family. He doesn't handle objects appropriately. And he is an extremely difficult a reactive, highly aroused child. I want you just to watch him. There's a lot of talk going on, but I want you to watch how unclear his signals are and how impossible it is to interpret what he wants or what his motivation is in this little piece of video. When I asked the parents, how often does this go on? Is this once a week, twice a week, once a day? The dad said, once an hour. This is our life. This never stops. He started with home treatment and we proceeded for a year. This is the child 1 year later. He's with one of our new paraprofessional therapists at home in a regular session.
Oh. Happy, the smile you see upon my face as the sun shines in the sky shows the world that I feel happy and my mood is soaring high. Look, I see something that's red and yellow and it smells good.
The flowers.
The flowers, yeah, that's it. I see something big and yellow and it's hot.
The sun.
The sun, yeah. Sometimes I feel so very sad and really don't know why. Instead of playing and having fun, I cry and cry and cry. Oh, thanks, big guy. Can you show me a sad face? What does it look like when you're sad?
He's really okay. He's okay.
He'll be okay. Can you show me what you look like when you're sad? Show me sad. It's okay, Coulson.
It's okay.
Yeah, you'll be just fine. We're not really sad, we're just pretending, huh? I see something green and leafy.
The tree.
The tree, yeah.
He's so angry.
Angry is how I feel right now. I shout with a mighty roar. I mostly want to frown and growl and stomp upon the floor. Show me your frown and your growl. Roar! And stomp on the floor. That's mad. We lost our page. Oh no. I think we are on angry.
Can I turn page, please?
Yeah, sure, buddy. I'm bouncing like a rubber ball. I'm more excited than I can say. It's really hard for me to sit when I'd rather jump and play. Can you show me excited? Yeah. All right. What did he do?
He jumped.
He jumped, yeah.
He's a zebra. He's a zebra.
He's a zebra? Because he's got black and white on him? Is that why he's a zebra?
I am a zebra.
You're a zebra?
Yeah, I am.
What noise does a zebra make, do you know?
Nay.
Nay, I think so. It's like a horse.
Proud.
Proud. I did it, I shout to the crowd. Getting dressed by myself makes me feel proud.
And
Is that proud, Coulson? Are you
Yeah.
feeling proud? Alright, you're doing awesome work today. Feelings come and feelings go. I never know what they'll be. Silly or angry, happy or sad. They're all a part of me. How's he feel?
he's so happy. He's so scared. He's so happy. He's so sad.
Is he sad or is he... Does he look... He looks angry, yeah. How does she feel?
This is the same child at age 7 in a follow-up study that we just conducted.
Did you know that I haven't been to Disneyland yet?
Me either.
You haven't?
No.
It's very exciting, huh?
I know. We're going to the one in Los Angeles.
Oh, and so some people fly there and some people drive their car.
We're going to drive
Yeah?
5.5 hours.
Oh,
That's not a lot.
that's not too bad, huh?
No.
No. And all the things you have to look forward to when you're riding in the car behind you.
Yeah.
When you get there.
Yeah, we're going to look for license plates.
License plates?
Yeah.
You can play cool games in the car, right?
We do like, you know, look for a license plate and then if we have
Okay. He has no signs of autism. He has got ADHD, but he's doing well in school. He has friends. He left the diagnosis at about between 4 and 5. All of his scores are in the normal range, and were by the time he was 4, and by the time we'd finished at age 2. He is not an unusual outcome. The other lesson I wanted you to take home today is this is actually an expected outcome at this point in the best of early intervention approaches for young children with autism across many different kinds of approaches. This is what we need to be aiming for. This is possible, and over half of the children in 3 of our studies have outcomes like this. The follow-up studies have demonstrated that the children that are receiving these treatments hold on to their gains over the next 2 to 3 years. They continue to be significantly improved compared to the comparison groups in IQ measures, in language measures, and in adaptive behavior. And all of their psychiatric symptoms are less than the children in the comparison group. Their ADOS scores are significantly lower than the comparison group. So the advantages continue at the end of treatment, even though the majority of these children did not continue to get autism-specific treatment after the age of 4. And we've demonstrated that the effects are not just surface effects or developmental and behavioral effects, but of course, and they have to be, brain effects. The paper that Jerry published in 2012, I believe, demonstrated that the children who received the 2 years of intensive Early Start Denver model demonstrated different brain responses to social stimuli than they had earlier. The children who had received ESDM showed as strong and fast responses to faces as compared to toys, as did typically developing children of the same age, in marked contrast to the comparison group, who showed faster and stronger responses to objects, pictures of toys, than they did pictures of people. This finding this was considered the top 5 scientific finding by Time magazine in the year that it was published. And I think the world was surprised that brain functioning would be changed from early intervention. We aren't surprised, are we? Behavior reflects brain function. If we're changing behavior, we have to be changing brain wiring, brain connections, brain functioning, brain activation. But it is very nice to know, and it's an important argument to make, that behavioral interventions do not address the surface level of behavior, that behavior interventions go deeply and change brain function. And probably brain structure as well, in terms of the neural networks that are being developed during these massive learning opportunities that these very young children are receiving early on. Behavioral treatment is a biological treatment for autism. It changes brain structure and function. And it's not just true for autism. This is true for early intervention in general. This is what education does. Learning changes the brain. I've been talking a lot about the one-to-one interventions that we've done, but we've looked at ESDM effects in a number of different ways of delivering them. We've studied low-intensity early interventions carried out by parents using the ESDM manual that we developed, and Lori Vismara was really the leader in this work. We demonstrated that parents mastered the teaching techniques at the same level as therapists in about 8 one-hour sessions spread out over 8 weeks. And they hit expert levels at about week 8, and they continue to improve on their own even without further coaching. Not improve, but just pick up more and more of the skills. This isn't about improving, it's just about certain ways of interacting that help children attend and learn. And we demonstrated in a number of single subject designs that there is a massive change. Here are the baselines of language. This is one of the probes Lori was using for 9 children who she followed before the onset of intervention. Here's each child's response to intervention. You can see from the first session on There's a large increase in children's communicative behaviors, gestures, and words, and that increases over the 12 weeks. Dramatically, children are going from 0 words to 70 words spoken in 10 minutes within 12 weeks of intervention, in which the parents are embedding the intervention in daily life and are being supported by parent coaches 1 hour a week. We also found that once the coaching stopped, parents continued to use the skills and the teaching techniques they picked up, and children continued to show these increased responses, more vocabulary learning, and ongoing use of the skills that they developed. We've also recently, Giacomo Vivanti's published a paper of ESDM in groups, and this takes us full circle back to the work we first did at JFK, in which we were working in groups and publishing papers from the beginning of the Denver model, which was a preschool model for young children with ESDM, with autism. And Giacomo's demonstrated in a very nicely controlled study that he carried out in Australia. The children who were in a daycare center, children with autism in a daycare center using ESDM strategies with the ratios of 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 adults to children, made significantly more progress in adaptive behavior and language and cognitive function than did a comparison group of children who were receiving autism specialized services in a state-sponsored autism program using all of the techniques that are available and that people use in public situations, the whole range of autism interventions. This one intervention was far more powerful in all of the areas that we expected it to affect. So, talked a lot about the response of children with autism to intervention. Is it special? You know, have looked at these data all my adult career and thought, these are massive responses. There must be something special about young children with autism that makes them so amenable to treatment. This must really support the idea that the social effects of autism are actually reducing a lot of their learning opportunities, and the environmental manipulations we're doing in these interventions are opening up more learning opportunities. But, you know, nobody's ever actually looked at that in a comparative way. So my graduate student, Katie Wallace, who's now Catherine DeVlantis and is at Duke University working with Jerry Dawson there, she conducted a meta-analysis looking at the effects of early intervention across several different groups of infants, not with autism, but infants with other kinds of developmental disorders. So she pulled all the controlled studies, the high-quality controlled studies together that looked at interventions for 3 different groups of children. One set looked at groups of children who had biological conditions that created developmental delays from birth. These were all Down syndrome studies. A second group of studies that she looked at were studies addressing very small preemies, beginning straight in the nursery and following them for the next 3 months. Both of those were parent coaching studies. She then pulled the literature on children who were at high risk of intellectual disability due to parents with intellectual deficits and very low SES, socioeconomic status. And those studies were carried out mostly in group situations, in daycare situations that provided parent coaching at home, and daycare wrapped around these children's lives from age 1 to age 5. And she looked at the effects of the change that was being demonstrated in comparative studies in each of these groups. So this slide right here has to do, it focuses on results from 5 studies of infants with Down syndrome, low intensity, an hour a week of home visiting across the first year, kind of the toddler year of these children's lives. And what we see are very positive effects in general, and the sum of kind of bringing the data all together, this demonstrates an effect size of 0.44. You can think of that as a percentage. It's like a 44% difference in the in the scores of the standard scores that are being used. So if they're using a Bailey score, this says that the children who received the intervention are scoring about half a standard deviation. That's about like 7 to 10 points higher than the children who didn't receive the standard deviation. So, and almost all of the studies, every single study demonstrated a gain in the children who were getting the intervention. So about a half a standard deviation. Then we looked at this is data from children who are high risk due to poverty and were in specialized preschools, very highly, very well delivered. And these children show a very large effect size, 1.26. So their scores on the average across all of these studies would be 1.25 standard deviations, 20 to 25 points higher than the comparison children. And these are mostly randomized controlled trials. We also looked at the preemies. I don't have this slide with me here, but the preemie effects are very similar to the Down syndrome effect. So these very small preemies with all the health problems that come with that, only 3 months of intervention post-birth and post-coming home. The effect size in the preemie interventions is about 0.5, so about, again, a half a standard deviation at age 2 to 3 in follow-up. Okay, so then we pulled a very nice meta-analysis that had been done by Mark Woolery and Riker, which looked at the change data from children with autism who were getting low-VOS type, discrete trial, high-intensity interventions. And these are broken down by the best designs, moderately good designs, and weak designs. The effect size overall for the low-VOS treatments is 0.56. This is the same effect size as in the Down syndrome study or in the very tiny preemie study. And even among the highest quality studies, the average of those is going to be probably 0.7 or 0.8. So, what do we make of that? What that says to me is that the effect of intervention in early autism is not special. There's not something special about autism that makes it so responsive to early intervention. That all these groups of children are showing strong responses to very well-delivered interventions. And it's not about high-intensity therapist-delivered interventions. It's probably about excellent increases in learning opportunities that are being delivered in children's daily lives. In the home visiting studies, that's being delivered by parents. They're the intervention agents. In high-intensity autism studies, that's mostly being delivered by therapists because they're the intervention agents. But it's very important to see that the effects in the home visiting studies are similar to the effects of high-intensity studies. And that, in fact, what do I take from this? My hypothesis is that the main ingredient of change here is the increase of learning opportunities that are very well delivered to little children, that are aimed at a place that they can pick them up right away, so they're well planned. They fit inside children's proximal zones of development, that whatever adult is working with that child or peer or sibling has learned how to get the child's attention, demonstrate or encourage a task, and stay with it so that there's a clear A, B, and C. A learning opportunity, a behavior, and a consequence. And it doesn't take a graduate degree to learn how to do that. We've got 4-year-old little girls who can show you beautiful ABCs with their little brothers with autism sitting at home playing at the kitchen table. It's a way of interacting, and it becomes very automatic over time. We saw this in our preschool. We had children without autism in our preschool, and we've done much work in inclusive settings. We don't have to train the peers in how to speak to kids with autism or how to set up activities or get the attentions. They model straight from the adults, and they have all the attention-getting procedures. They change their behavior, they target their language, they persist in responses, and they hand over reinforcers as if they'd been trained. So learning opportunities and excellent teaching, I think, are, in my hypothesis, the main ingredients of successful intervention. And that's what all these interventions are doing. They're embedding children's lives with the learning opportunities they need. So I think it's really important to think about intervention as life at home. Babies learn in context. Babies learn at home from the people who live with them. And there's a great quote I ran into from Robin McWilliams last week where he says, intervention is what happens when the therapist leaves. It's really a good quote to hang on to because, I mean, for all of us, it's daily life that we live in. And daily life offers the most opportunities for generalization, for practice across people, materials, contexts, in and out of the house, all over town. And it has the people that children care about most, want to imitate the most, want to be near the most, right there available. That's where the attachment relationship comes in, holding people together. We have data from Hart and Risley showing from their incredible work in 1995 the important learning opportunity differences that go on in children's lives in terms of exposure to language. From low-income children who were exposed to about 10 million words over the first 4 years of their lives, to high-income children who were exposed to 50 million words over the first 4 years of their lives. And this five-fold difference in vocabulary exposure is reflected in these children's language skills by the age of 3. The high-income children have a vocabulary that's over 10 times as large as the low-income children. And lest we think that that's an effect of the genetics of language development, they published a very nice paper in which they demonstrated that children who are at socioeconomic disadvantage in a low-quality preschool have a language level of speaking about 50 words in a 15-minute sample. Children in a high-income group speak around 100 words in a 15-minute sample in a high-quality preschool. But a group of children they worked with in Juniper Gardens from low-income families in a high-quality preschool began at the level of the low-income children, and within 9 months of regular preschool education in an enriched environment, now had the vocabularies of the high-income children. These are flexible skills, and they're built on learning opportunities. And so what about let's think a minute about the economics of this. Who are the highest prevalence conditions in early childhood health problems? Well, here's a prevalence chart. The blue lines represent prevalence in 10,000 for 5 different conditions. This is autism here on the left. You can't see my pointer, can you? I'm sorry. I thought you could. Okay, on your far left is autism. The tall line is an intellectual disability. The next group is cystic fibrosis. The next group is childhood cancer. The next group is juvenile diabetes. And so we see that across these conditions, intellectual and developmental disabilities are by far the most prevalent conditions. Here are the amount of funds that people raised for these conditions in 2013. So we see cancer is by far raising the most money through their fundraising events, cystic fibrosis following, diabetes following next, autism following next, developmental disabilities dead last. What about the amount of money that NIH spends on funding treatment studies and other kinds of studies on these conditions? That's the green line. Diabetes got the most NIH dollars of these 5 conditions in 2013. In terms of the disparity between prevalence and dollars spent on research, intellectual and developmental disabilities wins the prize. We are not funding the work for these disorders, and we're not raising the funds for these disorders that we are for other conditions. And why is that? My guess is that there are still deep social biases left over from the eugenics movement and the institutionalization period that for somehow make developmental delays a condition we don't want to talk about, don't want to think about, and don't want to really go out and work for. We as professionals have got to advocate for these children. We have got to raise our voices and join parents in the efforts for this. Why has so much attention gone to autism intervention? Well, there's this mystery of autism, but there's also really good parent advocacy and excellent PR around the effects of these autism treatments. Every autism story is covered in the newspaper, every new finding. Where are those articles on intellectual disability? they're not in the papers. They're not in the public eye. It's not in the public eye enough. The stories about change, the stories about effects are not prevalent enough. And so what's coming in the next 20 years? Where are we headed with all of this? Well, I think, first of all, my hope is that we actually do what the law requires that we do, that we are using empirically based intervention practices in communities, embedded in natural contexts and with natural interactions with the core people in children's lives, and that we're equipping parents and caregivers with the tools to provide those kinds of learning opportunities for their individual children. And I hope that we think about children with disabilities in their communities from birth on, every day, all the time, that they are part of the neighborhood group, that they're with the kids who go to the pool together and the kids who are at the playground together, that they're always together and not off. Instill these special programs which permeate California, permeate the East Coast. I don't know what it's like in Colorado right now. My guess is that it's not as inclusive as we would all like it to be. I think there are some lessons from the best ASD interventions for people working in other EI groups. And I think one of them is the precision of learning content and teaching techniques. I think autism has gained a lot about being very specific about what we want to see children learn and very clear about the steps we're going to take to get there and how we're going to teach it, and to use data to make sure that we are on target and that we take responsibility ourselves for the children's learning. It's our job to deliver those interventions, and that includes coaching parents to deliver the interventions. It's still my job to help that parent deliver that intervention, and the data that I collect is my contract with the family and with the child, that this is my job to help you accomplish these. That would help everybody, I think. And this process about measurement, analysis, revision, this is response to intervention, RTI. We could all be doing this in a much better way, measuring what we're doing and using the data week by week to make changes in how we're delivering the interventions, or how we're helping parents tweak their practices so that children can be learning what parents want them to be learning. I think we could also be doing a better job of addressing the behavioral phenotype in other disorders. There are specific behavior phenotypes that go with Down syndrome, that go with ADHD, that go with specific language impairment, that go with Fragile X. How much do the early interventions really target those specific aspects? We might get more mileage if every Down syndrome intervention for a child with Down syndrome really looked at mastery motivation and task focus, and started from the very beginning making sure that we are really reinforcing that rather than all the joint attention shifts that are going on for young children with Down syndrome, which keep them out of their tasks. And we could be funding more research and not feeling like we know all there is to know about early intervention for children with other kinds of developmental disorders. Look at how we are refining autism interventions. I mean, month by month there's a new paper out. And we're all hanging on them and trying to figure out, oh, Amy Weatherby's got a new paper out. How can I get the effect that she's got from that home visiting one? You better believe I'm going to try to do it. We should all be hanging on the papers that are coming out so we can be building our interventions. But I think there are also lessons for autism interveners to learn from the EI work that goes on. And one of them is about ecological validity. The principles of infant learning, the importance of natural settings, the people that a child loves and feels safe with, learning infused in every activity and interaction that's going on. We need to be focusing on that for young children with autism. Why we think we can pull them out of that, create something different and artificial, and then have that transfer on its own. I don't know why we think that. I don't know why we think that they learn differently than other infants. There is no evidence that young children with autism do not follow normal developmental trajectories in every area. We don't think enough about families as primary interventionists in autism, and that's where the money is in early intervention for infants. We don't think about family supports enough. I think often think about families as they're the assistant therapist. That's their job, be my assistant therapist. And if they're not good assistant therapists, they're not motivated or not on program. Why are we thinking that? These are families. They're working with their babies. They're our hands. If we had the kinds of approaches to family supports, family motivations that the EI people have, we wouldn't have some of the difficulties that we think we have in communicating with families and working together to get interventions integrated into daily life. I think many autism people could learn from EI about interdisciplinary practice and about really understanding that not everything is operantly learned, that there are different learning procedures in place in different modalities and in different times in a child's life, and we need to fully understand what all goes on in motor development, what all goes on in communication development, and what precedes speech, and how we build good pragmatic skills. And that's not operantly learned. And I think we need to make sure the developmental perspectives are permeating autism intervention. There's a new paper by Laura Schreibman that argues very strongly for the importance of incorporating developmental and behavioral practice, and it's time for us to do that. There's no reason that these sciences should sit separately. We need to integrate them. And so we as interventionists face a delicate balance. We're walking a delicate balance all the time in the work that we do. Outcomes of early intervention matter, but then again, they don't. They matter because educational outcomes matter for every child. We expect education to provide all children with a range of skill sets that they need for adult life. Skills in communication, skills in task focus, skills in social responsibility and personal independence, enjoyment and participation in lifelong learning, ability to use personal time constructively and to get pleasure and relaxation. I mean, that's a menu for adult life, whether you have autism, whether you have Down syndrome, or whether you are a thriving 7-year-old without any developmental problems. This is what we want for all our children, and we rely on quality education to do this. We can't do this all ourselves as parents. And so educational outcomes do matter for adulthood. But on the other hand, value of a person's life doesn't have anything to do with their skill set or their repertoire of abilities. We value each other because we're human beings and because we value human life. We care about people because we love them. We care about people because they're part of our lives, part of our social networks, because we've grown up with them, because we've shared church and school and friends and families and vacations. And the acceptance and valuing of individual differences is a fabric of our lives. That's a philosophy that brings us all together here. And so it's important to us as humans to be able to care for others, to support people who need support, regardless of what those supports are, whether it's an iPad, whether it's a better car for your teenager, or whether it's a different communication system for your child with autism. Support and care are part of what we do for each other because we all need support and care from each other at some points in our lives, and we're happy and willing to do that. It's part of who we are. And also as professionals, it's our responsibility to understand, to learn more about what people need and how we can help them, and that's the role of research. We have to learn so much more about how to support and help people with developmental disabilities across their lives. And finally, as professionals, we have to raise our voices. We have to advocate. We have to testify when it makes us anxious. We have to say yes to talks that we don't want to give because we know the kind of questions that are going to come from the audience. We have to put stuff out there that people are going to react to and write negative papers about because we have to advocate. Because the children that we serve don't have a very loud voice, and the public doesn't embrace their futures the way it embraces other children's futures.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was created in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other brain disorders are helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.